And we are live. Welcome back to another episode of Heroes and Men. This is Laris. I am here with a guest. I'm looking forward to interviewing here. Adam B. Coleman of WrongSpeak.net. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. I want to start off with a quote. Actually, that comes from one of your blogs, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, I grow tired of people using black people like a political football, throwing us from one cause to another to manufacture outrage for policy change and to appear virtuous. You people are our villains, pretending to be our saviors. Those are strong words, my friend.
Yes.
Explain to me what prompted that. Obviously, that's part of a larger blog post, but
Yeah.
that particularly struck out to me for various reasons. But I'd like to hear why you came to that assertion.
Excuse me. Um, yeah, this came in the wake of Kyle Rittenhouse and his acquittal,
Hmm.
and it already amazed me how people were able to turn a situation involving Kyle Rittenhouse, who had shot three people who were all white, and Kyle Rittenhouse himself is white, into being a racial issue.
Right.
But it extra annoyed me seeing, especially white leftists, um, and some of them are actors and actresses who were going on and on about how they stand with JoJo, and how if Kyle was black, and hearing this rhetoric over and over and over, and it just annoyed me to the point of wanting to write that response initially on Twitter because it's this insinuation that black people are incapable of getting any sort of fairness in America. And it's
Right.
this continuous narrative that is to try and place us as being these consistent consistent victims. And I take offense to that. Like, I have there been injustices for black people? Yes. Have things improved? Yes. Both things can be true. But to insinuate that any black person who's ever stood face of court has they've never received any sort of fair treatment or they've never beaten a charge, um, is patently false.
Right.
And I can't stand the moral grandstanding using black people as a way to do so. To basically insert black people just when you feel it's necessary to insert black people to show yourself as being morally righteous, um, and that, regardless if it was black people or it was anybody else, it's this type of pandering to make themselves look good. I can't stand. I can't stand it when politicians do it, and I can't stand it when elitists do it as well. And many of these so-called celebrities and so-called um, uh, you know, morally righteous people are elitists.
Right.
And and if you look deeper into the words, what they're actually trying to say and what they actually believe, um, I don't think anybody should listen to these people. So before that post, I basically went on a little bit of a tirade of seeing on my timeline these different actors and actresses all saying the same type of thing. Some of them black, most of them white, and I responded to each and every one of them. And granted, I don't expect them to actually see it, but it was just more of venting and people to see the words that I'm trying to say. So if anybody is thinking like them, to understand that this is a false way of looking at the world, and it's not true. It's absolutely not true. So that's kind of like the origin that led to that.
Well, first, I'm glad that you. When I read that, I got flashbacks of my experience in the theater and film community. I'm an actor. I've been
Mhm.
doing it for over 12, 13 years. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten into these conversations with people where I've actually said this to them. It's not just black people, it's Hispanics, it's anybody who isn't, they call it, I guess it's like BIPOC now. It's like basically
Mhm.
they're putting all of these groups of people, these diverse cultures into one giant sort of conglomeration. And it's just like,
Mhm.
um, I have on many occasions felt as if I was being cast simply to check a box,
Mhm.
regardless of the fact that I was actually, whether or not it was right for the role or not, whether or not I actually had the chops to do it or not. I actually had to tell an artistic director, I said, don't cast me if I'm not right for this role. Because I can tell by the way that you're actually referring to me right now that you're casting me simply because you need to have a more diverse cast, right? And
Right.
so it's that notion of being sort of pushed around like some sort of political chessboard,
Mhm.
and it almost feels dehumanizing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. It's a it's this consistent dehumanizing
Right.
way of looking at Black Americans. It's one of the reasons, and we're not necessarily talking about politics, but like it's one of the reasons why I was done with the Democrat Party is because they fully embraced identity politics,
Right.
and I can't stand it. I know that being Black is a very diverse concept. You know, I'm half Trinidadian and half, if you want to say African American, but my mother's American, my father's from Trinidad. Um, I have a different story than other people.
Mm.
Many of Black Americans, even if both their parents are from this country, they have a different story depending on what region of the country they're from. We share some general history, some cultural references, things like that. But to say that our absolute interests or our absolute results are all relatively the same is ridiculous.
Right. Well, that I want to tie into that because, yeah, we're not talking about politics, but as a man, right?
Mhm.
One of the main things I think, one of the main pillars of manhood, I think, is autonomy, or at least freedom to maneuver, right?
Yeah.
The ability to make one's mind up, the ability to be your own man, to be sovereign of your own mind. And when these people are making these decisions for you and moving you around this political chessboard or whatever,
Mhm.
in essence, it's very emasculating. At least that's the sensation I got from it.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? Would you say that it's a similar sentiment for you?
Yes. The path towards understanding masculinity has been more so understanding that um, mental sovereignty is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see people trying to take that away from me, it pisses me off.
Right.
Um, the ability to say, forget what the group says, let me think for myself,
Mm-hmm.
or forget what these other people, even if they're powerful people, forget what they say, let me think for myself, and let me decide how I want to move about this world. Um, and we have people who are promoting an ideological framework that says, depending on what you look outwardly, this is what you actually want. It's incredibly superficial. It takes
Right.
away the individual aspect, um, and it's ultimately something that I feel like is disempowering for people. Because for me, I haven't always been this way, but I've become more and more skeptical, but in a healthy way, as the years have gone on in my life. And I made it to this point by being skeptical of everybody,
Right.
of my, people that I care about, famous people, the media, politicians, being far more skeptical about them and not having this blind faith in the individual anymore, um, and wanting to understand where do I fit in this world, but I have to figure that out for myself. And for people to take away my voice or saying that the fact that you're questioning this makes you not this, um, you know, because you speak this way, because you ask these questions, because you don't vote this way, um, you're not this, right? And it's insulting. I think it's a common kind of thing that comes to mind is like people really think this way. People really think
Right.
this rigid about the world. Um, to have one specific way of viewing whatever topic and not allowing us to think for ourselves, not allowing us to say this particular way of thinking is kind of flawed. You know?
Yeah. I mean, rigid, I think is a great word.
Yeah.
Uh, when you try to have conversations with these people and say, you know what, perhaps the way that you're thinking, there's another perspective, or
Mhm.
this is just I'm coming from a different, point of view. It's almost as if you're talking to a block of stone. I mean, it's the most bizarre thing. Like I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't think I'm insane. I don't think I'm nuts. I think I'm making a lot of sense, and I could be wrong in my assertions, but perhaps I could be considered. But it's almost as if you're talking to nothing.
But you know what it kind of reminds me of? it reminds me of my background is in IT, right?
Okay.
And it kind of reminds me of when you work in like a call center. Some people feel comfortable in a call center when they give you a script,
Mm.
right? And other people like myself, I don't like a script. Like I want to know how to, and I'll tailor it the way I want to tailor it. It's like when you talk to those people, you're telling them things that are off script and they don't have a response for it. And they get really frustrated because you were told everything is on script, right? It's like telling people, pointing out that the media lies to them. They're like, well, no, because no. I was like, no, that's not true. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
No. And then they insults and they're just upset. But that's kind of reminds me of it's this. Some people like a rigid world. Some people like that. I know that if I do these 10 steps, this will result into this. And if you disrupt any of these 10 steps, I'm going to be really pissed off. And some people like living that way, to know that their path forward is almost predetermined as long as you follow these certain things. In politics, you're told these very particular things, and don't try to disrupt me from those things. You're told these very particular talking points. If you dare to challenge those talking points and say that they're wrong, then in many ways it's like, who am I?
Right.
I've tailored my life around this.
Do you think it's a function of our education system? I taught in the Department of Education for about 8 months. I was always a critic of it prior, but when I came in, I loathe them now. I taught in New York. I live in New York City.
Yeah.
And so that's easily like, I think we spend more per pupil than any other place in the country, and easily one of the worst education systems, or like at the very most mid-tier for as much money as we spend out here. Anyway, the point being that there's something about our education system that is so rigid. It's like, you know what I mean? Like they want to create it. It's supposed to be this pipeline, and you're sort of teaching to the lowest common denominator. Creativity is discouraged, failure is discouraged, collaboration is discouraged. So could it be a function of the education system, or is it just this is how you control people? Now, I don't want to put my tin hat on, right? But there is an element of this. It didn't seem to be, even when you watch, I think art, culture is a reflection of the people of its epoch, of its time. There seemed to be, when you watch old plays and movies and stuff like that, people seem to be more adult. They seem to be a little bit more mature in their view of the world. But when you watch things now and the way that people speak to one another, it's almost infantile. So where do you think that might be coming from?
I mean, I think education to some degree comes into play. Less about what you're taught, but how you're taught, or what you're told what is important. I don't think we tell people enough how critical thinking is really important. But even saying critical thinking is important, people have bastardized what critical thinking actually is. They're like, critical thinking would result into you hating Donald Trump, or that kind of thing. It's like, no, like critical thinking is actually being critical of different things and applying a set of logic to it. So that means that you at some point will be wrong about something, whether it be politics or socially, because you're able to apply some form of critical thinking to it and realize that you're wrong. And then that's how you self-correct. But we have basically the teachings of rigidness, as well as being narcissistic to think that you're always right. So yeah, part of it is, I think it's how we teach kids. I would go even further to say it starts at home. I think that there is a growing number, and not I think, statistics show there's a growing number of kids who are growing up without both parents.
Yeah.
I'm a product of that, and I talk about it openly, and that contributes into missing out on a bunch of different things when it comes from the masculine end, from the father, who implements all different types of positive masculine traits, and that's how it's supposed to be, including critical thinking, including discipline, including stoicism, all these different
skepticism.
Skepticism, exactly, right? But it's not to say that women are incapable of doing it, but I go as far as saying one is naturally better at doing it than the other.
Right.
Just like women are naturally more nurturing than men are, right? And we do it in a different way. So it doesn't mean one is more important than the other, but you need both. And that's why I'm a big advocate for the nuclear family. But you mentioned something about people being kind of infantile. And I was actually thinking about that not too long ago. It feels like young adults are like grown children.
Right.
And, you hear people saying, I was 22, I was a kid. And I started really thinking about like when people say, 20 is you're a kid, when they talk about like players who are being drafted into the NBA, who's about to make millions of dollars, and they still call them a kid. Right? He's a kid. He's going to make us. He's a kid. It's they use it a lot of times to kind of like give them a free pass from when they screw up, to kind of like lower them down for the expectations in life. Right? Oh, he's a kid. He's 23, and yeah, sure, he has 3 kids with 3 different women, but he's a kid. He makes mistakes. It's like, no, he's an adult.
Yeah.
Like, there's a level of accountability and responsibility that you're supposed to have. And I see it like this. As a society, we've set 18 as the standard. So from that point on, you're 18 years old, you're an adult. You do something wrong, you can go to jail with the big boys, right? You succeed in life, you can make your own money, have your own bank account, right? So you get the pros and the cons of being an adult once you turn 18. Stop calling them kids. Stop, infantilizing them. Just treat adults like actual adults. But I think we've kind of been socially conditioned to make excuses, to lower the expectations of the next generation, to say, well, they're ill prepared. We'll give you another shot. It's this way of thinking that we're trying to prevent people from failing,
right,
as if failure is a inherently bad thing.
There's an element, and this is part of. So you ever familiar with the book Iron John?
No.
Iron John was written by Robert Bly, and in essence, what it is he talks. It's about manhood. It's about masculinity, but he talks about the lost aspect of masculinity. Primarily, one of the central tenets is usually women are sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you think of Mother Nature. Mm-hmm. Women are usually identified with nature, and man is usually identified with God in the sky. But he said that actually prior to the Judeo-Christian, and I'm a Catholic, but prior to that, our civilization, men actually also identified with the earth, and women identified with the stars as well. So there's sort of like an incompleteness, and part of it was sort of man's need to live in the muck, right, and the hardness of life. Yeah, go ahead. And we're back. So like I was saying, so the book Iron John is about masculinity and about the missing aspect of masculinity. So as I said before, women usually have been identified with nature, with the earth, right, with the things that nurture, and man has been identified with God. That's usually a Judeo-Christian belief, right?
Yeah.
But that he's saying that framework is actually incomplete, because women do have wisdom. They do have wisdom, you know what I mean? Like up in the stars, and men do actually need to identify with the earth, because we hunted, we killed other men, we had to go out and go out into the darkness, into the dark part of the wood, and find ourselves, whatever. And so part of it is sort of taking ourselves from that sort of like woodsman, that like jungle aspect, and pulling us out and transcending into becoming eventually the God, and pulling up out of that. So in order to do that, you need to be able to overcome hardship. You need to have a higher standard. You need to transcend your base nature, all of these things. It seems as if we are not able or not willing to, because of the lack of masculinity, because let's face it, right? Standards, laws, civilization, the hardness of life, the real world is introduced to you by your father, right? Your father roughhouses with you. And like Jordan Peterson talks about, it's like to show the child the boundaries of his or her physical realm.
Yes.
The father says, that's not good enough. You can do better. The father goes and says, we need to climb that mountain. The father says, no, you need to shoot closer to the target. All right, all these things about standards. And in essence, especially with men, because women are born valuable, right? They have inherent value. They're born, in essence, I'm not going to say necessarily complete, but definitely inherent. They have far more value than men do. And men have to sort of be guided to what manhood is. And it's something
Right.
that you had spoken about. You were like, because I didn't have my father in the home and because I didn't have that relationship with my father, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was sort of something missing, right? You sort of had to figure it out. And
Mhm.
a boy is not meant to figure it out. He's supposed to have uncles and grandfathers and fathers there to take him inside and say, this is how you hunt. This is how clean your shield. This is how you do all these things. And obviously I'm going back and using archaic references, but it doesn't matter what it is. Your father's supposed to teach you how to change a tire and do all these other things. And then you learn the bond and you model it.
Right.
We're not doing that because you're right. A 23-year-old man is not a boy. At 18 years old, they were fighting in trenches 100 years ago.
Right.
What do you mean at 23? You know what I mean? Like, and that's not to say war is not the only reference, but throughout all of human history, men that have been 15, 16, 17 years old have done miraculous things because it was expected of them.
Right.
And so if you wouldn't mind, talk to me about, because it sounds like you said, I wasn't always like this. And now I'm changing sort of my tune in the way that I think. It sounds as if you made a metamorphosis, a transition from a more, I would say, infantile, because I was in the same way, right? I was super progressive, whatever, infantile way of thinking to a more adult, a prudent, more introspective sort of understanding of the world. Can you talk to me about that transition and what prompted that?
So there's different areas where if we were to talk about, let's say, relationships, right? I think that's the easiest for people to understand. I went at it from a very feminine standpoint, right? What I would call pedestalizing, right? Putting her above me, going above and beyond, being the nice guy, right?
I've been there, bro.
Yeah, and I never understood, because if I was to go back, and I remember hints of certain things that people would say to me, and I never understood. It didn't make any sense to me. I remember there was this one guy who was not very good looking, not very smart or anything like that, but he was very popular, and girls loved the shit out of him, right? And I was like, what do they see in this guy? And I remember talking to him one time, and he was like, oh, I just don't care. So I thought to myself, I can't go around just like not caring about girls. But he meant, no, you just, he was a teenager. He can't really vocalize it, but what he meant was you can't focus on them, right? And because you're not focusing on them, it shows to them that you're not desperate, right? So you can move about. If they want to follow you, then they follow you. If they don't, they don't. And that's what he was doing. And he had realized that at a young age, that if you have this mentality, the girls are going to come in and out of your life, but you're not going to put them at your center. And you can do that. And for whatever reason, that drove the girls wild back in high school, right? So he didn't mean that he literally just doesn't care about them. He just didn't care if they went along with them or didn't go along with them. It's that kind of thing, being the nice guy. Girls would tell me, you're too nice. I was like, what does that mean? Wouldn't you want someone who is too nice or nice at all? But what they mean is they don't want a guy who appears desperate, right? Because they want a guy who appears valuable. They want a guy who appears in demand. But if they call and you stop everything you're doing, you drop everything you're doing to go see them, that signals to them a level of desperation. And that's troublesome, right? They want a guy who is hard to get, who is sought after, who is attractive, not just from a physical standpoint, but attractive to other women, right? So, if you're a guy who hasn't figured it out yet, you're like, how come this guy is an asshole and he gets all the women and he doesn't give a shit about them? That's on the extreme level, but it works because it's sending all types of signals to all different types of women. And people don't realize that it's like an invisible tango that's happening between men and women. I talk to women. I've had a bunch of female friends, and I would have conversations with them. And I go back and think about it. I don't think they realize why. It's just something that they feel. Women are more sensual. Women go by their instincts of how it makes them feel. And they're just moving about life kind of in that way too, where they just feel like this guy is someone, I don't know what it is, but I need to go towards him. That kind of thing. Once I started, I mean, it was a slow process for myself, but once I started figuring these things out, like don't go and buy her freaking flowers, you barely know her, stuff like that. The things that you're told, and that's the other thing. Growing up single parent home, you grow up around women,
Right.
you're told to do these extra things, or you think, and maybe they don't tell you explicitly, but you think these are the best things to do. But they send all types of bad signals, and you're wondering why. I had a great day. Why didn't she call me back? Everything was fine. I was polite. I took her out, paid for the meal, showed her a good time. Why didn't she call me back? Right? It's because I was sending all the wrong signals. I did nothing for her in the pants whatsoever. Right? I was as good as her best friend. Right? And so you get friend zoned and all these different things. So it took a while for me to really understand where I was going wrong and how to correct those things over a period of time and embrace certain aspects of being a man, and having that mindset, or what I call today the abundance mindset.
Correct.
Where you say, all right, cool. You're done. All right, cool. I'm out. Do you want to go out? No. Okay. Peace. And I move on with my life, and not trying to say, well, give me another shot. No, just set boundaries when it comes to dating, set boundaries when it comes to women, and they respect it and they move on. And maybe you get a hey big head when they try and reach back out to you. But, I'm happily married today. I just got married in September.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you. And a lot of it had to do with the culmination of all those things that I learned with her. And, it obviously worked out in my favor. She's a beautiful woman. She's a great woman, a great wife, and we're eye to eye in just about everything. She's a perfect person for me. So it took a long time to get to that point of understanding how to approach relationships, how to look at women, how to look at myself when it comes to the dating world. How valuable am I? And am I portraying myself as someone of value?
Right. And if, say, you had a closer relationship with your father, or maybe other men had been around, do you think that definitely you wouldn't have had to go through that difficulty, that learning curve?
Well, let's say if it wasn't my father, because even if my father was around, I don't know how positive my father would have actually been.
Fair.
But I will tell you this. I had my son at the age of 21, right? So I was a kid. No, but I had him young, and growing up without your father in your life, you're trying to figure out how to be a father.
Sure.
It's a little bit difficult. But as my son got older, especially now that he's 16, when he started having more interactions with girls and having conversations with him and giving him tips and having open dialogue with him, I told him point blank, don't worry about girls, focus on yourself, the women will come. Do you know how life-changing that would have been for me as a teenage kid who was desperate to lose his virginity, I might add, and just having, why was I so desperate to lose my virginity? Why was I putting women at such a forefront in my life, right? Because I didn't know any better. I didn't have any direction. I didn't have, women, and I see that for a lot of men, they put such emphasis on women and how women think of them, how women see them. But what do you put on yourself?
Right.
Right. To be a desirable guy, you got to be a desirable man. You got to build yourself up. And I didn't put as much energy in building myself up to be desirable from a woman's standpoint as I put into what can I do for her? What can I, what can I buy her? Let me call her. Let me show her how much attention I want to give her. Right. Attention's a woman's currency, but she has to earn that money.
Right.
So
I think, and I mean, even with a father in the home, right, or even with a good relationship with the father, the messaging in the society is man must supplicate to woman.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it in the films, music. I mean, I spoke about this on the last podcast. It's like from the moment you're 5 years old, or even less than that, your mother usually is the one. Usually, the mother spends more time with the children. From the time you're born all the way until college, the authority figures in your life are women, right? So you're seeing it everywhere, and then you're getting this sort of these mixed messages, and guys just don't understand, like, first of all, that they're men, that they have their own authority and autonomy, that there's a whole world of men out there that you've never even been exposed to, and the way that men think, and the philosophy of manhood. And it's rough, man. Like I went through the same thing where I was like, why is none of what I'm doing working? I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not. None of this makes sense. None
Yeah.
of it makes sense. Like, I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. Da, 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 da. And then I started to figure things out. I started to look online. I started to talk to other guy friends. I started to talk to men in my family, and I realized like about 97% of the stuff that I had learned about women and intersexual dynamics, and even about dealing with other men, was completely erroneous.
Well, the reason behind it, there's one main reason, and that's feminism.
Yes.
You know, and people think feminism only affects women, but it affects men just as equally,
Right.
because we've been in many ways lied to, men and women, to think that the world before the 1950s was just men with axes over women saying you
Clubbing
must
them over the
obey.
head.
Yeah, just like it just completely barbaric.
Yeah.
But those were different times. But to give the idea that women had zero say in anything in life simply because she couldn't vote. So they use that, the voting, as the we don't have true equality.
Right.
Maybe so, but it doesn't mean that you had no power, you had no say, you had no influence. There are obviously influential women throughout, let's say American history, right? So we've all bought into this women are inherently oppressed narrative, right? Because, for example, men are on average stronger than the average woman.
Yeah.
So we must be oppressive, right? But just because we have the strength doesn't mean that we use it.
Correct.
And I hear so many times women use horror stories from, let's say, their grandmother, the horror stories from their grandmother. Oh, my grandmother, or someone that my grandmother knew, the guy was abusive, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that happens today, right? Yeah. Like, abuse towards women wasn't exclusive to the pre-1950s, right? It happens today. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. But they've taken these horror stories about men and women's relationship and kind of bastardized it into thinking that, well, anything from the past in regards to how men and women treated each other is wrong, simply just wrong. We shouldn't behave in that particular way. And that's where the confusing part comes into for someone like myself and you, where, let's say, 1920s, being a simp in the 1920s makes sort of sense, right? Because women weren't necessarily going around being promiscuous.
Right.
So you wanted to impress the few women that were around, that the
Correct.
few options that you had, and show her that you could be a provider, right? It makes no sense today to be a simp.
None.
And so that is the difference. We're operating off of an old standard. Men are operating off an old standard under the feminist logic, and we're getting unsuccessful results. We have men who are settling down with women who are obviously promiscuous, right? And getting disappointed when the end result is them being divorced or the woman's cheating on them. That's why, like, education is extremely important when we talk about men and women's relationships. But feminism has taken a huge toll on how men view women, how they're supposed to interact with women, of being ultra respectful and always mindful of boundaries. Anything that comes out from the feminist mouth these days is about how we need to treat women more and more like these precious dolls who are incapable of giving their own words and say and how they actually feel and advocacy to themselves, they have no autonomy, right? That's what feminism does to the average woman. If a woman makes a mistake, it's somebody else's fault. If a woman enjoys something that is seen as troublesome, it's because she was tricked into being that way, right? So I have a friend who, I don't want to necessarily get into his name, but I have a friend who got involved into something which they are trying to say is like a sex cult, right? But she's like, no, it wasn't that way, and I chose to be in it. And like, no, it's because you're brainwashed. And she's like, how are you going to tell me? I'm telling you why I did it. But they keep trying to insert that she doesn't really have any autonomy or power in this particular situation. And that's what feminism does in our society. It gives all different types of bad messaging, and men and women equally get confused. Women get confused on a different level. Women get told that having more sex is something they should embrace, and that any guy will embrace her after the fact. And they're not told later on that, well, actually that diminishes how men look at you. Right. Being more promiscuous is actually a negative for how men think. So what do they say? Women, don't alter yourself. Men need to accept you. So it always takes the onus away from the woman and puts it back on the man. Men are always supposed to change to suit the more and more becoming infant way of thinking for the modern woman, and that is what feminism creates.
I'm thinking of you familiar with Patrice O'Neill?
Yeah.
So I listen to the Black Phillip show and all that stuff. So they have him up on YouTube, and he talks about American women. We're not buying what they're selling, because he was talking about going down to Brazil, and he was like, the dynamic between men and women is completely different down there. Yeah. He's like, even the whores, even the prostitutes, they'll even pretend like to whatever, they'll play the role. But he's talking about, he's like, I came back here and I'm like, we're not buying what you're selling. Yeah. And I think it isn't even their fault necessarily. It's just the messaging that they've received. And so you're right. It's like hot girl summer, whole phase, X, Y, and Z. But that has even the OnlyFans thing, right? It's like, you don't realize, yeah, you're 21 years old. You look real good right now, but you're going to have a family someday. Yeah. And fast forward 15 years, and your 15-year-old son, his friends have pulled up old pictures and old videos of you on OnlyFans. He's going to be horrified. He's going to be absolutely horrified, and that's going to destroy your relationship with him. He's never going to be able to look at you the same way. So it's not just the things that you do now don't only affect you; they affect everything down. But you're right. It's like the infantile sort of like, I want what I want when I want it now.
Yeah.
And it happened in the 60s, where a lot of the boomers, right, when they were coming up, they basically threw away all of that old wisdom that was given to them by the people, the generations that came before them, that was hard won by depression, by 2 world wars, by the coming up of the country. And this was across racial lines as well.
Yeah.
Because I think something like the Black family was like 85% marriage rate prior to 1950. After 1965, it was, obviously we know what the statistics are now. But what I'm saying is all of that hard won wisdom was completely thrown out the window, and everything was inverted.
Right.
Talk to me about what you know. What do you know about the red pill?
Oh, I know a lot.
You know, that's what I figured. Because I'm only referring to that because I saw. So you had done an interview with a lady. This nice blonde lady. She had blonde hair. You had done one interview, Suzanne. You had done one interview maybe 6 months before, and then you did another follow-up interview just before I think you got married. And even the way that you were conducting yourself changed, because you had mentioned, you were like, I started consuming different content, and I started to realize and have these discussions with my girl at the time, which is now your wife. Yeah. And so I realized then, I was like, hey, he's been watching some stuff. So who were the creators that influenced you, and what was it about their messaging that sort of woke something up in you that caused you to shift your thinking?
So what I'll say is this: I am a heavy consumer of YouTube content, right, of all different types of stuff. So, from politically, I've consumed conservative content, progressive content, mainstream liberal content. I've throughout the years, I've consumed all of it. So that's why I have a particular viewpoint today, because I've taken all those different pieces put together and tried to make sense of it. Same thing goes when it comes to the manosphere or the red pill content. There's content from let's say red pill guys who are completely done with women. MGTOW guys. So there's content from MGTOW guys. There's content from guys who are active daters. There's content like someone like Kevin Samuels, who sees winning is getting married, right? So all of these different guys have different outcomes, but they have a general similar philosophy or a general similar way of looking. And it's if I was to put a label on it, it's a very conservative, traditional way of looking at the man's role and the woman's role. Or even just saying that there are roles between us, and we need to do what works the best, what feels more natural. So I've consumed all these different content. I've watched MGTOW stuff with my now wife, right? And it's
how was that received?
Well, see, that's the thing. She understands that I watch some of it for entertainment, and I watch some of it because there's a nugget of truth. These things exist. Like for example, MGTOW guys they'll do like the horror story kind of thing, right? So they'll take a newspaper clipping, see guys, this is why you should just go on your own. Correct. Right? For me, I'm like, nah, I'm not going on my own, but I see what is happening out there. Thank you for the news clipping, right? You take someone like Kevin Samuels, who talks about relationship, marriage, making it to that point. And it's these days, especially talking about women, what they need to do to get to that particular outcome. And watching that with my wife, who in the very beginning wasn't too sure about it, but she warmed up to it. And now that's probably like the only person that she'll be like, yeah, go ahead, put him on, right? Because now she understands, like she's kind of come to that point where she understands he's telling the truth, right? It's a hard pill to swallow, especially for someone like herself who spent her entire life thinking one particular way, getting negative outcomes because of it. And if someone on YouTube is telling her that actually you've been lied to, and that's the wrong way of going about it, and it's hard to take that in, even especially when you weren't thinking that this is what you're going to come across. But in regards to myself, I take in basically all those different avenues. But for the most part, I see it as entertainment. I will tell you this, and I've consumed less of it recently.
Sure.
Because I think it's the red pill content, I think in general can be a very positive thing. I think in general, it's good that there's outlets for men to express themselves, to talk about masculinity without it being bastardized, right? The bad part is that there is this way of thinking, my philosophy is better than yours, or when something like, I don't want to give any particular content creators names, but when one content creator doesn't like another, then they say, look at how this person reacted. That's not very masculine, right? As to say that we're incapable of having emotions. Or when that content creator that you said wasn't masculine apologizes and say, we own up to our mistake, you don't accept it. And you keep coming and coming, and you build drama and more drama. So I'm seeing a lot of that happening recently. And it's actually been a big turnoff, because if I want to watch drama, I watch a soap opera.
Correct.
Right? But I'm watching for entertainment factor, and I know drama can be entertaining, but that's not productive. I think there's so much potential growth. There's so much good that can happen, and it is happening. But I think it's being watered down by infighting and bickering between content creators, and just not saying, all right, you know what, I don't like you, so I'm not even going to talk about you. Like, I'm not even going to give you light. But they continuously talk about them because it creates more and more clicks, more ad revenue, more interest, and it builds up their profile. So I've kind of stepped back from a lot of different content creators. I've unsubscribed from them as well. So the ones I watch consistently, I would say, is Kevin Samuels and Minister Jap.
Yeah, Kevin Samuels is one. I've watched a decent amount of his stuff, and I actually watched a little bit of his like fashion for men,
Yeah.
which I actually find to be way more positive. I know why he's doing what he's doing. I actually think that he's doing a really good thing, and he's catching a lot of heat for it, right? Because he's telling it actually goes in line with something that you said in a previous interview about the Black woman being unable to, you can't sort of criticize her because she holds the power in the community. And he's legitimately going right into the lion's den and just he's going right up against it. So I commend him for that. And I really do think that he's coming from a very positive place. So he's one of the people that I really do respect. But I am in accordance with you in the respect that it can get really negative. And I think it's important for men who have never been exposed to that messaging to really consume it and then digest it, but then come out on the other side and have a positive, like do something constructive with it. Because you can get caught up in that and a year or two goes by and you're still watching the same videos and your life hasn't really changed. It's meant to expose you to certain things, but ultimately it wakes you up and then you got to go and now you're not in the matrix anymore. Good. Now what are you going to do with this information? And part of the reason why I made I have this channel is because I want to bring men on from all completely different walks of life, completely different philosophies, some red pill guys, whatever, and try to get to the truth. Because I don't know if that's even possible, but I think it's important for men because as men, we need to be precise in the way the world actually functions. We don't have the luxury. It's in The Godfather. I just read The Godfather, the book. I've seen the movie several times, but the book, and Vito Corleone says that line to Michael, and he says, women and children can afford to be careless, but men cannot. And we can't. We need to understand the way the world actually works. Otherwise, we could be killed. We could die easily. Like people don't. That's another thing that people don't understand reasonably. It's like the primary victims of violence are men. They're not women or children, right? And so we always have to be on alert, and we have to make sure that the people around us are not only capable, but they're also stable individuals. And there is a lack of instability in that community that I think undermines the messaging, which could be very valuable to the men watching it. And if you're really impressionable and you don't know any different, you could be swayed by it and be stuck in that vortex for a long time without coming out.
Well, that's why it's important to be critical, right? And Christianity on its own is, in my opinion, a good thing. But you can easily use Christianity and bastardize it and make it into a negative.
They've done it.
And they've done it. So you could do that with any particular ideology.
Right.
It's about you as a consumer having a balanced view as to what you're hearing and what you're consuming, and saying, how does this apply to me? Right? Because it's easy for people to talk about this person over here and this person over here. I got two examples. So that's how all women are like. But is that actually what's happening with you? Right. And I think that's the bigger point, is to take information, find how it works in your particular life, and see if this information is accurate. Is it anecdotal? Is it something that's beneficial? Is it just a horror story? Right? Because horror stories exist with anything. For example, George Floyd. George Floyd is a horror story. Right? George Floyd's situation is not endemic to the everyday life of Black men. It happens. It's incredibly rare, though. And that's the truth, right? So it's understanding that this information that is being put out there in many ways is there to gain some sort of reaction from the viewer, right? So when the media pumps out George Floyd, they want you to react by continually watching, to donate money to whatever, to buy someone's products. This multinational corporation is going to put Black Lives Matter on their boxes to show that, and you buy their product. So
or in their banner.
On their banner, right? So people are using this as an opportunity to get you to react in a very particular way that benefits someone else. But is that benefiting you? You don't know George Floyd. Why are you reacting in a way that you do, Norm?
Right.
And so it's that kind of thing where it's to understand that there is a level of manipulation that's happening around the world. there is a level of manipulation when it comes to media, even YouTubers, right? There's a level of deception, right? Whether they do it willingly or they just, some of them cut corners, they leave out context, right? Maybe they do it purposefully, maybe they do it just because they cut corners, but understand that you have to take information in and you have to be relatively skeptical of it. There was a situation recently with one particular person. I'm not going to mention their name. All the Manosphere guys started talking about him and started calling him, this and this and that, but completely left out the context as to what led for that person to react in this particular way. And actually, fortunate enough, I know who that person is. And I had a conversation with him, and he said, yeah, that was something that I did before in my past. I've talked about it. I've moved on, and I'm doing all of these positive things when it comes to men. And yet everybody is using this opportunity to come after me. It's only because I'm being successful at doing something positive within this community. And granted, I'm fortunate enough to talk to him, to see and understand and have good faith in what he is telling me. And now I have a clearer lens to look at all of these different people who are taking this one opportunity to make a few videos talking about one particular person and one small action. This guy didn't kill anybody, right? One small action to use this to gain some sort of notoriety or clicks or whatever it may be. And that's the skeptical part, right? And that is one of those things where it may be unsubscribed from a couple of people, because I watched the video and I saw a level of dishonesty or a willingness to suspend belief when it came to this one particular person for this one singular action. And that's the kind of healthy skepticism that I'm talking about. People that I've watched their content for a year plus, I said, this is manipulation. I'm done. Right. And I moved on from it. So just as much as I cut off CNN, I cut off other YouTubers.
Without giving too much away, is this about a blog that came to light that was written a while ago? Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I have an idea who you're referring to. I don't know much about the issue. I just understand that there are people involved or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I hear you on that for sure. And there is an element of, and this is I think why Jordan Peterson came to prominence. He really was like, if you want to take it back to the history, I think like Lycus was the first guy, then Patrice O'Neill, which actually I think the red pilling of men, Patrice O'Neill, like he was a great comic. I mean, he's brilliant. He was one of the greats, definitely in the modern era. His legacy is he's like the big brother of all of these men that came after him long after he was dead. I think that's his greatest legacy. And maybe he didn't have the big time career that other comedians that were coming up at the same time did. But I think that his lasting legacy, people will be talking about him 50 years from now. They're going to be listening to those tapes. Yeah. But Jordan Peterson came up at a time where he was talking about logos sort of being under attack in our society, and the notion of questioning things and actually verifying evidence. And Bill Burr jokes about this, and all the things in essence that are masculine, that have always been, that have built this country, right? That are I guess it's the classical liberal ideals of sort of I guess the what do you call it, the scientific method and questioning things and really sort of asking these. You're like almost not allowed to ask these questions anymore. You're not allowed to question the authority and the powers that be anymore. You're not allowed to even, and this is something you had written in one of your articles. You're like, it's my kid. Like I'm the one ultimately that has authority over the kid. You're not allowed to tell me what I can do with my child. And I really do believe that in the last 60 to 80 years, there has been a psychological castration of the American male, the Western male in general. And more power is being taken away from him. And I think that the beta test was actually the Black community in the 1960s, with the whole going around and saying, well, you can get these benefits, but you can't have a man in the house. And sort of like the men hiding in the closet or like pretending that he didn't live in the house and X, Y, and Z. And so, but now you're seeing it expanded to the larger realms of society. You're saying 25% of white families, single mother households, 50% of Latino families, single mother households, 70% of Black families, single mother households. And when you look at the prison rate, 85% of those guys come from single mother households. All the school shooters all of them practically, single mother households. There is a lack of sort of, and what I'm saying is, I think the man's job is to guard against the enemies, both foreign and domestic, but not only
Right.
the literal enemies, the spiritual and psychological enemies that might infect his home,
Yeah, or the ideological enemies.
the ideological enemies, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that men have been sort of canceled, uh, stripped from positions of power, things that happened 30 years ago supposedly are now being used to take to destroy men's careers that spent decades shaping. All of these are culminating in sort of this hyper chaotic society where we don't have any control anymore. I mean, if you think about the mandates, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Uh, where I was going with that is, you're a father, right?
Mhm.
How have you guarded your son against these influences and these forces that be, to guide him in the way that you feel is best for him?
So it's interesting that you put it that way, because I think a lot of people think for parents they have to like indoctrinate their children, right? But I think truth matters. And I
Okay.
think giving your children the ability to decide certain things for themselves is really important, right? And if you're on the side of truth or you're the side of morality, your children will likely, if you raise them right, they'll likely come to that conclusion. You don't have to, it's kind of like if you want a particular outcome, you can yell at them that you're going to do this, or you're going to lay out reasons why it's something that could be beneficial if they do certain things, and does it make sense to do this certain thing, right? So there's two different things. You can be forceful with it, or you can lay out a case as to why this is the best possible outcome and say, try it and see how that works.
Mm.
And you see them mess up, and then they realize my parents were right. This is the best possible outcome. So when it comes to my son, I basically I keep open communication with him. I've established I don't judge you. You can tell me anything. If you fuck up, tell me, right? And I'll tell you this: the angriest I've ever gotten with him, it was when he lied and he didn't tell me the truth about this one particular situation. And I, and he got upset that I was upset. Like he was crying because he realized I was disappointed in him,
Right.
and he didn't have to have this as the outcome. And I scolded him for a couple weeks, but it was a healthy scolding. I reminded him of how disappointed I was, because he can do better than this, and he is better than this, right? So I think for when it comes to my son, I have open communication. I don't judge him. I tell him that he can question anybody, including me. And as long as it makes sense, you should be able to get some sort of answer. You should be able to question things. And if I can't answer that question for you, then it's okay.
Mm.
I basically set it up where I want him to understand that asking questions should not be an offensive matter, right? And if someone is of authority can't answer your question, then you should be able to find out who can. And if things don't make sense, or things seem irrational or logical, then maybe they are. You should ask questions around it. So, like for him, the whole COVID situation, in the very beginning, when he's panicking, he wasn't panicking, but when he started feeling worried because in his home, everybody's filled with anxiety. And I'm talking to him like, it's not that big of a deal. You won't fall into that category. Some people are sick, blah, blah, blah. And I explained to him why he should be relatively calm about it, right? Doesn't mean that there isn't anything bad happening out there, but for you, have some sort of logic when it comes to it. And he had an understanding as to kind of question the narrative, question how crazy this is.
Right.
And he came to his own conclusions. He's the one sending me things like, you see how crazy this is, Dad? Like, right? My son's mixed race, and some people don't know this because he's fair skinned. So at one time, some girl said, "It's because you're a cis white male," and I was thinking to myself, "That's funny." She has no idea, and this is all ideological drivel. She doesn't know why she's saying these particular things,
right?
But it's that kind of thing where he's able to laugh at it because we've had these conversations of just being logical about certain things. And I'm a Christian, but I don't force my son to be a Christian, but I still show him in life to have a moral standing about yourself and have a level of principles of how you want to live your life. So if you uphold yourself to that, and let's say you don't claim a God, then I'm still happy with what you turned into be. I just want my son to be a productive member of society. I want him to be happy, and I want him to experience failure and success. And I don't lie to him. I'll give you an example. He wants to go to Japan and he wants to do animation. He wants to go to the hardest market to do animation. And I told him, you might fail, right? Which seems like the opposite thing you're supposed to tell kids these days. But I said, but you're good. So I say, go for it. And if you fail, you fail. But you can learn something from it. So he understands that the truth behind it. I might fail because it is very competitive. So if I understand this, then let me go and try. I'll try my best. And if I fail, then I won't be defeated. I won't feel defeated in life. But I see so many kids who are lied to consistently by their parents that they're going to be the successful, you're the smartest, you're the greatest. They do it from, I swear to God, they do it from when they're babies. They say, this baby's a genius. You see how quickly he learned his alphabet? That does not make your child a genius. And when you fill your child's head with this nonsense,
right,
without a particular outcome, like, for example, I know my son is relatively smart because throughout majority of his schooling, he's been on honor roll, right? He enjoys going to school. He enjoys reading. He enjoys the academic aspect to it. So that's why I would say, yeah. But if my son got consistent C's and he's not that bright of a kid, I'm not going to blow his head up, even though the school keeps passing him. So it's a level of honesty that people have to have about their own children. Excuse me.
Yeah, there's Khalil Gibran. He's one of my favorite authors, and he talks about the relationship between parents and their children, and he alludes basically that the parents are the bow and the string, and the children are the arrows, and that essentially it's the parents' job to propel the arrow through into the future. And it sounds to me like you're doing that for your son, and I don't know what more you could do besides that, but to tell him, hey man, you could fail, but do it anyway. It's kind of like kicking him in the ass a little bit for him to go in his direction and to figure it out. And again, Jordan Peterson talked about that. He goes, boys are not hard. They just need a little bit of encouragement.
Yeah.
Like it's surprising how little encouragement boys need to just say, oh, well, yeah, I can do it. You know what I mean? Guys will run into oncoming fire to save their friends for a fucking medal.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the thing that men need is, above all else, it's recognition and respect.
Mm-hmm.
I did a hard thing. Just acknowledge the fact that I did a hard thing. Like I don't even need money. You need money. You know what I mean? And that's a form of recognition. That's a form of a currency, obviously. But it's that simple. And so many young men are just not getting it because they don't understand that is what they're looking for. That is what they're needing. These kids that are out there in the streets, right? They're acting a fool. Like most of those kids are not even criminals. They just don't have any other hierarchy to latch onto. And so they're seeing kids around them, and that's the model. And then they fall into that life. And before you know it, they're 10, 15 years into it. And this is who they are now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the aspect of, like, you use the analogy as far as like the bow and arrow.
Right.
The other problem that I'm seeing is that parents don't want to be responsible for being the beau, right?
Right.
And I've seen that a couple times where I've made posts and they're saying, "I'm tired of parents getting blamed for the children's, you know, outcome." And I was like, "That's being a parent,
Yeah.
right?" If my son grows up to be a mass murderer, you know what? I'm not directly responsible with my son being a mass murderer, but you know what? Yeah, some of it falls on me,
Right.
right? But I am pretty certain that my son won't be a mass murderer because I know that I showed him the right ways of moving about life. I showed him how to avoid certain people in life, what to attract towards you, what to reject, right? People who might use you, put yourself in the wrong place, wrong time, all these different things. I've taught him genuine life lessons, and I've taken note to how he responds to it. So I'm fairly confident that my son will not end up in jail, not end up in any horrible situation like that. Um, and yeah, I'm fully capable of handling the bow part, and I think that is at bare minimum. You get blamed, right? And when I talk about the level of responsibility that mothers have to have and fathers have to have, there is no equality when it comes to that. That's one thing that has been abundantly clear, kind of like how we talked about before. Women aren't allowed to be accountable for certain things. It's someone else's fault. The same thing goes to bad outcomes for children, right? Good outcomes. Oh, thank you, mom. I love you, mom.
Right.
You know, right? Bad outcomes. Well, dad's a deadbeat dad, right? Or my dad was neglectful. My father was neglectful, right? But we're not allowed to say, why did my mom choose this guy?
Correct.
You know, and this is where when I talk about single parents, I'm not even talking about divorce. You know, stuff happens, relationships happen, whatever. I'm talking about people who specifically had unprotected sex with someone that they're not married to, who specifically did not seek out a relationship with a particular person before engaging in an activity that could result in children being born. These are very conscious decisions.
Hmm.
And the way we talk about it is like, well, you know, it happened. Like, no, no, there's a series of events that led to this even occurring. We have a multitude of birth controls, and even down to the most immoral act of abortion that exists. So every child that is born today was 99.9% of children who are born today were born because the parents wanted them to be born,
Right.
right? So,
The mother specifically, because she has full control over
right,
whether or not a child is born.
right. That's being very specific, yes. So the mother had that, has that responsibility, but that's responsibility,
Right.
right? So you're also responsible in the type of life you bring them into, and all of these different things. And I hate the way we talk about parenting. I hate the way we talk about sex, because sex is talked about what was done to the woman as if women have no enjoyment in sex. Meanwhile, women are going out having sex for empowerment. Are they
Right.
doing it because they don't enjoy it whatsoever? How does that make any sense? You know, uh, women are told that basically things are happening to them.
Mm.
They're consistently very young, even if they're in their mid 20s. I was young, I made mistakes, right? If you're a 16, that's a different story. If
Right.
you're 25, you're not young and make mistakes and you didn't know any better, right? So there's a level of responsibility, accountability when it comes to parenting that both mothers and fathers have to have. I think it's far easier in our society to shit all over men and shit all over fathers. And I do it to my own father in my own book, right? But it's a different story, especially in the Black community, when you say, hey, gently, there's a level of responsibility that some of you mothers have to have for putting children in this very predicament.
Right.
And some of it is selfish, some of it's irresponsible. We should be able to talk about it. And we should be able to talk about it not from a standpoint of saying, you know, wagging our finger at mothers or anybody else, or women like that. It's to say, acknowledge that this is not the best way of doing things. So then when you have your daughter or when you have your son, you tell them to move in a different way. Do not repeat the same thing I did. Right? I have no problem telling my son that. I had my son out of wedlock. Right? His mother and I were not together. I recognize today that I put my son in a level of danger that if I moved in a different way and I had a child in a different way, he would not be presented with that particular danger. Right. So it doesn't mean I regret what I did or anything like that. It's understanding that I am partly responsible for putting my son in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be damned if I tell my son to do the same exact thing that I did and just say it's okay. Life happens, whatever. But there's so many situations where you see um, opportunities for a generation to be interrupted in a particular behavior patterns. And you'll see, I'm sure you've seen situations where the grandmother was a teenage mother, the mother was a teenage mother, now the daughter's a teenage mother, right?
It's in my family. I've experienced it.
Yeah. And there's no interruption in saying, do not do this. There's no interruption in saying, let me change the circumstance to try to prevent this, right?
Right.
It's, well, life happens. This happened. It's a very loose way of looking at the world and loose way of taking accountability, which there's very little accountability being taken. So I think it's very important that, if we're going to have equality, we got to talk about being equally responsible for the children's outcome. And yeah, I'm a father and I take accountability for my son's successes and failures. Not just conveniently when he does great on a test, but also when he fails, right? And what do I need to do to make sure that next time he doesn't experience this, right? What do I have to do? Not blame a system, not blame his mother, not blame anybody else, not blame his friends. No, what do I need to do that's differently as a father? What do I need to show him? What do I need to say to him, right? And I think that part is missing when it comes to certain men and certain women.
Yeah, I don't have any kids myself, but that seems to make perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm in complete accordance with that way of thinking. And it actually goes back. I want to go back to something that you said before in the beginning when we were talking about power and the notion that before 1950s it's as if women had no power, and that's complete horseshit, because
Right.
a man's power is overt, a woman's power is covert.
Right.
And it's the same thing. It's a man can't sleep with a woman unless she lets him. You know what I mean? Unless he forces himself on her, which that's a different thing. But it's a dance between the two of them. So men and women are both equally responsible for the outcome of that. It just takes different forms. And going on that, the notion of responsibility, I want to wrap it up here, but I want to talk about your book, Black Victim to Black Victor. Talk to me about how you came to write a book. What made you choose the title, and how has that message been received in the current cultural climate we live in now, especially being part of the Black community, where that may not be something that a way of seeing the world that most people hear I should say out in public, because I think private conversations with people and public conversations with people tend to be different.
For a number of years, I actually wanted to write a book. I want to say it was 4 or 5 years ago. I started traveling a lot, doing a lot of solo traveling, mainly throughout Europe, going back and forth to Germany, especially. And, it gives you time to really think about your life. And I kept coming back to legacy. And my son is my legacy, but I wanted to think of something to leave behind for my son where he could be proud of his father. And I thought of a book, but I had zero idea what to write about. And funny, like my first idea was questions, like a book about questions or questioning things, but that lasted for a couple days.
Yeah.
But the pivotal point was George Floyd, actually.
Okay.
when that happened, you know, there have been incidents between police and black people and ambiguous results and stuff like that, but I never thought I would see it turn into what it actually turned into. I think the culmination of that event, COVID, and an election year just made it explode into
Right.
being something that was just a complete overreaction, a complete emotional storm that was happening, and it lacked a conversation that didn't have emotion. Um, and so that's what led for me to say I want to find a way to to talk about race or to talk about certain things that are happening, but it felt really difficult to even have this particular discussion, at least at the time. I started seeking free speech avenues and just having conversations with people, and to see like, am I the only one who feels this way? Does all of this feel kind of irrational? And I found out I wasn't the only person who felt this way. And I got encouraged to write more often. And that's when it hit me one day. I was like, I think this is my book idea.
Mm.
And basically, for about 9 months, I wrote and spent a couple months editing and self published. And I was basically consistent all the way through. 2020 was a perfect year to actually write this book because there'd be days I'd be driving into work and an event happens, right? Or something comes up on the news, or some commentator says something, and I'm like, that's perfect. I gotta put that in here, and I write about it. So there are some current event stuff that I use as examples to talk about a particular topic. Um, but I also wrote it in a very personal way, and I lay out the introduction is called questions, and I ask very particular questions, and I make sure that the reader understands that I'm coming from a good faith place. Because
Right.
I think often what happens is when we give critiques about Black culture or things of that nature, it comes from a place of saying you're only doing this to scold Black people. And in the introduction, I basically state, if at any point you think I hate anybody within this book, stop reading, because I want you to understand I'm coming from a place of love, but love also means criticism, right?
Yes.
And so I
Real love for sure.
real love for sure. It comes from a place of healthy and poignant criticisms about what you see. And so that's how I start the book. And I've had other people basically understand what I was trying to do. I'm talking about certain failures that are happening within Black culture
Right.
from a very matter of fact way, from a not so emotional way. Um, Someone described it as like putting my arm around someone's shoulder.
Mm.
So it's not antagonistic. Although I will admit, because of everything happened in the very beginning, the way I was writing was very angry, and it
Mhm.
was coming across. So I want to say it was a few months after writing, I reread what I originally wrote, and I realized how angry I sounded. And so I actually had to rewrite a good portion of the book in my actual tone, like how I
Wow.
talk today. This is how I actually speak. And in much of what I was writing before was coming from a place of anger and being kind of antagonistic, and not the way I want to portray myself. Not for sound bites or anything like that. So I had to actually go back and rewrite all those earlier chapters, earlier writings. Um, but I wanted it to come from a place of good faith. I wanted it to be I wanted to talk about certain social problems that I see that happen within Black culture, while also talking about my personal life story. So I think the center to everything that is going wrong, you can use Black Americans as an example, but it's really just it's like the canary in the coal mine. That's kind of how I see it. It's family.
Right.
Family is the start. That's we're born into a family, we're raised in a family, and whatever happens in that very beginning point, that is like our life trajectory from there, right?
Hmm.
Things get interrupted, but family has such an important piece during childhood development. When you start to understand psychologically what happens to people, it almost determines what's going to happen unless you have significant interference in between, right? Which is why you see what you said, like 85% of prison inmates
Yeah.
are from single parent homes. That's a very important component. Now, people will take that as just saying because they're from single parent homes, that means that all single no. What we're saying is that's a component, right? There may be other things. There may be a physical abuse. There may be all these other things, but we need to talk about the importance of having both parents within the home. And I wanted to use my life story to talk about this very thing. And I'm very open. I'm very honest. I critique myself, because I'm not someone who's perfect. I made mistakes. I critique my father. I critique my mom. I critique everybody because it's only fair to do. So it's a very fair book. And the only people that I'm really going after is the government and elitists. And people in the book, I call them the ivory tower black elite. These people who make money off of the pain of other black people.
Right.
And so those are the only people I kind of go after by name. Is kind of basically punching up to a degree, but I would say throughout the book, I'm not even really going after black people. I'm going after the ideology. I'm going after what people are thinking, because people can change how they think. But if I go after black people, it's like I'm saying they're inherently something was wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going after black culture, right? Because culture changes. The culture of 2021 is not the same as 1921 for black people, right? So culture changes, which means that if culture can change, then people can change. So that's why I don't really attack black people in the book. I attack the things that people are thinking, the way people are viewing things, the level of immorality that we just say, oh, it's all right, it's okay, simply because they're black.
Right.
We're unwilling to air out our laundry, even though it's important to kind of do so, or we pretend that people can't see our laundry is being aired out. So it's a whole bunch of different things. So to sum it up, it's social critique wrapped up in like my life story.
It's great. One of my favorite Americans is Booker T. Washington. I think that the man should be on money or on Mount Rushmore. I just think he's just an extraordinary human being. Anybody if you want to know what an American is, you got to read Up from Slavery and just understand his story. Like, this dude walked hundreds of miles to get an education, slept under a bridge, literally built a school with his bare hands. He is the epitome of an American entrepreneur and a pull up by your bootstraps. But he talked about the talented 10th, which is what ended up becoming sort of the black leadership, the black elite. This was in the late 19th century, and you all know this stuff already. But he also talked about the race hustlers, and he talked about the white liberals that would, in essence, sort of play the marionette puppet master thing. Like, that was sort of there. He understood that there were people that this is what their role was going to be and what they actually actively wanted to play. And this was 120 years ago he was talking about this. And we're having this conversation today. And it's shaped so much of our modern discourse. And it surprises me that it doesn't surprise me, because education is what it is, but people don't know it, or at the very least entertain the fact that perhaps they're being misled, they're being tricked, there is another message out there. And I asked you that before, how it was received, because I've tried to have these conversations with people and they call me all sorts of names and stuff like that. And I'm like, I'm not attacking you. I'm saying, like, this is historically what a very prominent American figure was talking about, that was a leader, not only a black leader, an American leader. I think it should at the very least be considered. But to put that aside, that was 100 years ago. Thomas Sowell has been talking about this for 25 years, 30 years. And so my last question to you is, have you dealt with negative backlash from having this, or is it overblown in the public eye, but people are far more reasonable, or at least open to what you have to say privately?
I think people are more open to what you have to say as long as I'm really big on communication.
Hmm.
And I think one of the biggest problems we have when it comes to political discussion, social discussion, is that there's a lack of proper communication about ideas.
Right.
Um, you know, you should be able to talk to anybody about a particular idea, even if it opposes you ideologically. So, for example, I should be able to have a conversation with someone who's a progressive and understand their viewpoint and have a cordial discussion, even if we don't agree.
Right.
But it's about exchanging ideas, having them think about it. They may say something to me that's like, you know what, that's something to consider, right? But this is all effective communication. And the way I wrote the book was in a way of having a way of like effective communication with someone else. I'm employing that. The problem is that even for someone who agrees with what I'm saying in other books that might agree with what I'm saying, it's either being over academic, right? In this book, I purposely tried to stay in my own lane, right? So I didn't want it to be filled with stats, but I have some, right? I didn't want it to be, technical jargon, but I'm not using, ABC kindergarten words, right? So
Yeah.
I don't go. I stay basically in my lane because I understand most people are coming from a very particular level, and I explain things in a very understandable way. And I think
Right.
that's why people like my writings in general, is because I can take a theory, an idea, and I can express it to where even if someone who's unfamiliar with that particular idea, they can understand what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And so I think if you express things in a particular way, you have an open mind, and you can show a level of vulnerability. Anybody who's read my book, who's actually read my book and not insinuated what my book is,
Yeah.
they come away with saying that that was fair. That was a fair book. I'll tell you one quick thing. There is a review that someone wrote about my book, right? They said in the beginning, the book started off really good. It got to the part, there's a chapter called that talks about feminism, basically. And they wrote 3 paragraphs. He blames black women for everything. He's got mommy issues, blah, 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 right? And then after that, they said, the rest of the book was really good. 3 stars. So I'm like, can't win them all. I'll take it.
Yeah.
But that goes to show you that even though she ideologically disagreed with what I was trying to say when it came to feminism and the role of women or even my own mother, she understood that the vast majority of the book is a very fair assessment of what I was actually trying to say. So I actually, at first when I read that, I was like, wow, they're completely missing what I'm saying here. You only critique black women. I was like, you missed a whole chapter where I called my father weak. Like, what do you mean I only critique women? But I was just like, you know what? That's fair, right? People are coming from different places in their head and how they interpret things. So I think in the long run, people who've actually read the book really like it. I'm not some big famous person as of yet, so I don't know what my readership is per se, but I'm sure there's people who read the book who aren't necessarily in my political spectrum, but I'm a moderate. I'm right-leaning moderate, but I'm a moderate. So I'm not too far off here with what I'm trying to say, and I think people understand what I'm trying to get at. The last thing I'll say is, I think I even wrote this in the introduction. My goal is not to convince anybody, because we do that too much. We try to convince someone that we're right, or instead of just expressing what we think. So if you are a progressive or whatever, I want you to read what I wrote with an open mind. And if you come out with it disagreeing with everything I wrote, that's fine. As long as you understand what I'm trying to say, and you allowed me the opportunity to convey my ideas to you, then that's all I care about, right? This is a fair exchange of ideas. And that's ultimately the objective. I wrote the book because I wanted to express myself, and I want to leave something behind for my son. I got to do those things. Whatever happens afterwards is just gravy, assuming it's positive. So I want people to kind of take that away, that I'm coming from a place of good faith. I want people to understand my perspective and understand I'm not here to convince you. You can disagree with what I have to say. I may have some things wrong. And, even since publishing, there are some things that maybe I would like alter slightly, right? Just by being enlightened by other things. But I think it's to the point where it's not enough of a change in my viewpoint to alter the book or anything like that. I'm very proud of what came out of it. And that I was able to do it on my own without anybody pushing me. I just did it. So I'm trying to use that book as a way to help build other people up to do the same thing I did. There's nothing inherently special about me. I'm just a dude. But I think many people can find a way to express themselves. That's what I'm using Wrong Speak for, as an avenue to express how you feel, even if it's counter to the narrative. Express what you want to say. You're an amateur writer, put it out there. I was an amateur writer too, so I'm trying to use the book as a way to not just, build myself up, but to help put other people up too.
That's great, man. And I really do think that you're a shining light in sometimes the sea of darkness. And I'm glad I've found a lot of people on Twitter, and I wasn't a Twitter guy at all. And I didn't really want to be an online guy. I just wanted to be an actor. And I wasn't interested in the whole discourse, but I was very frustrated in the environment that I was in, because so many of the people, like, I couldn't even have a decent conversation with. And I'm glad that I've found people like you and other people that are questioning things around them, and maybe they don't agree on everything, but at least they're willing to say, maybe there's another perspective here, and I want to throw my hat in the ring and see if somebody responds to it and it resonates.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Tell us where we can find you, brother.
I'm on Twitter at wrong_speak. I'm on Facebook. You look up Adam B. Coleman. Basically everything people could find is on wrongspeak.net. I publish articles there. You can purchase the book from there. The book is also on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. So I'm basically as many places as it could possibly be. But Instagram as well. You can look up Wrong Speak or look up Adam B. Coleman. You'll find me. So yeah.
Great. Well, I'm going to include all that information in the description. Go ahead and get his book. Follow him on Twitter. The guy's got some great stuff. And thanks for tuning in. Of Heroes and Men, this is episode number 3 with Adam B. Coleman. Adam, you've been a prince, man. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thank you. I appreciate having me on.
All right. Peace.